So I am presenting on, okay. So I am presenting on the timeout controversy. So this was a fantastic article and overview looking at the empirical perspective of timeout and the myths associated with timeout. It was presented by Lauren Quetsch, Nancy Wallace, Amy Herschell, and Cheryl McNeil in the summer of 2015. So there's a lot to go through here. So I hope that I'm able to get enough done or don't take up too much time. But first and foremost, timeout typically evokes a lot of controversy. Contrary to the fact that we have seen it time and time again be recommended to reduce problem behavior for typically in clinically indicated kiddos. It's been used in the classroom for a number of decades, and it is validated and endorsed by the APA, the AAP. So timeout is well validated both by research and by organizations that we know will support good evidence-based practices. And there's still a lot of claims against timeout. Oops. I don't know why that happened, sorry. Okay. And there are still a lot of claims against timeout, and typically those are unfounded and uninformed. So what I'm going to look at are some of the myths associated with timeout as presented by the authors of the article. First and foremost, as we're thinking about how we operationalize timeout, it is timeout from reinforcement or timeout from positive reinforcement, as Kasdan always says. There are three scenarios in which timeout is effective and we are using it. So first and foremost, timeout from inappropriate or timeout for inappropriate behavior, such as noncompliance, a safety issue. So a child is hitting, hurting, kicking, and then when use of reinforcements otherwise are not effective. So for instance, peer attention. Oops, I don't know why that's going on. So I'm sorry. I'll just keep moving it back if it does that. But overall, effective timeout involves a reinforcing environment as well as removal from that environment. So these are some of our timeout myths. I'm not going to get too far into these because we're going to go through each one individually so you can use it with your trainees. So first and foremost, positive parenting is enough. So timeout should not be taught because positive parenting strategies are typically enough. What we know is that implementation of purely positive parenting techniques alone is insufficient to improving child behavior. And we only see slight improvements of that oppositional behavior. And the larger problem behaviors are typically remaining, such as, again, hitting, hurting, and repeated noncompliance. Differential attention is also not typically enough. It's not effective in reducing problem behavior across the board. We know from Bromrand that warmth, love, clear and consistent parental control and limit setting, or really that authoritative parenting, is really effective to creating a positive relationship with your child and ultimately is effective in, or the most effective parenting style. And then ultimately, we know that 86% of studies use positive reinforcement with timeout to increase positive behavior. So timeout is used in connection with the positive parenting strategies, such as positive reinforcement. Okay. One myth is also that timeout is too manualized and does not individualize treatment. So we look at three different treatment models here. So summer treatment program, PCIT, and Defiant Children. And what they find is that timeout should actually be modified if the initial timeout protocol is unsuccessful. We do a really great job of that in PCIT. We modified based off of developmental age. We'll reduce the time if needed for kiddos with autism, for instance. And ultimately, that the foundation of timeout is by removing the child from reinforcing events and enhancing the time in. And ultimately, we just think about that flexibility with infidelity. That's always incredibly important. So while timeout is part of manualized treatment programs, flexibility with infidelity is always a key component here. Timeout. So myth number 3 is timeout can be re-traumatizing for children that have experienced maltreatment, particularly at the hands of their caregivers. So physical abuse, what we know is that it's actually more likely to occur when parents and children are stuck in that coercive cycle, as Patterson describes. And it's really important to consider when you are looking at a PDI sequence or any timeout protocol, whether or not timeout could serve as a trauma trigger. And the reason that could be is, for instance, we may want to modify the backup procedure or the timeout room if a child has experienced seclusion or neglect. But ultimately, a 3-minute timeout is typically very unlikely to re-traumatize a child that has experienced abuse. And ultimately, it tends to actually create a highly therapeutic and supportive experience for the child when they can see their parent resetting and providing a lot of calm time in with their child once timeout is over. And families, especially families that have gone through physical abuse or some form of maltreatment, will possibly also resort to harmful parenting practices when they're highly stressed. So timeout provides a consistent practice for, again, those 3 core reasons that we use timeout. Myth number 4 is that timeout can be harmful for children. This is one that we have to fight back all the time in clinical practice, and that what we know is that the coercive cycle and parents that are both at high risk and low risk of inflicting inappropriate consequences can do so, again, in that coercive cycle, and that positive discipline alternatives are necessary to decrease the stress that parents experience and therefore may resort to spanking or yelling. Some opponents also refer to children becoming more angry or dysregulated from timeout, and research shows the opposite. So timeout allows both the parent and the child a safe and calm space to regain control of their emotions and to practice that resetting. So timeout is truly effective for both externalizing and internalizing behavior, to reset to normal limits or to come down or decrease in frequency and intensity, as well as achieve better emotion regulation strategies. Number 5 is really interesting. So why should we teach timeout to parents if there's a possibility that it may be implemented improperly? Timeout is implemented in the context of larger parenting practices. So timeout is typically taught, or most importantly taught, after a lot of positive reinforcement practices have been practiced with the parents. PCIT provides a great strict mastery criteria to graduate from treatment and to move on to the PDI phase. Defiant Children refers to or requires families to learn 5 key positive parenting practices before moving on to timeout, for instance. And again, it's our ethical responsibility to focus on positive and effective practices that the parent can use instead of resorting to, I don't want that to go too quick, instead of resorting to some tougher behaviors. And then just in conclusion, there are tons of research that looks at the dissemination of timeout and how effective it can be in reducing aggressive behavior, generalizing compliance across the board to other environments, improving child compliance at home, and then improving emotion regulation. And when taught consistently and when practiced with a lot of coaching, parents are able to use timeout as a safe and effective form of discipline that feels consistent to the children and has a level of predictability that can overall improve the child's emotional and developmental well-being.